absolutely delighted to have you here today. And our topic for today is Rising to the Cloud in 2021, tips to accelerate your cloud migration. My name is June Bauer, and I am your host, and I am so happy that you've taken the time to join. We are so lucky today because we have got a wonderful panel that is going to be answering some questions that I have for them, but they're also going to be here to answer your questions. So I really welcome your participation today. If you have a question, go ahead and put it into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. To the right, you'll see a Q&A button. Or you can put it in the chat as well, but we'd love to have you put your Q&A questions in. We'll actually take those at the end of the discussion. But as we're going along, if something pops in your head that you want to ask about, please feel free to just put it into the Q&A. We'd love to have this be interactive. So we're going to start today with introductions. And as I said, we've got an amazing panel here today. So let's just go to the next slide and introduce our panel. So I'm going to let each panelist introduce themselves. They'll do a much better job than I could do. So Husin, go ahead and introduce yourself and welcome. And I do not, it looks like he might have dropped off. So let's start with Ravi instead. So Ravi, we're so happy to have you. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so glad to be here. Hey, I'm Ravi Lachhman. I run the evangelism team at Harness. So if you're unfamiliar with Harness, we're a CI/CD service, platform as a service. And a little bit of my background, I've been a distributed systems engineer for a while. I worked at a few firms, IBM, Red Hat, and Mesosphere, and Epidemics also, always forget that one. And yeah, just been building large scale distributed systems. And now I just love to talk about engineering efficiency.
Fantastic. Great intro. Thank you. And Max, please introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Max Martynov. I am CTO of Grid Dynamics. Have been with the company for about 13 years, pretty much since the inception of the company in 2006. And we are helping Fortune 1000 enterprises to accelerate digital transformation. And cloud migration is one of the big areas of the digital transformation nowadays.
Awesome. That's great. And it looks like Husin is back. So Husin, just in time, we'd love to have you introduce yourself.
Yep, apologize for the disconnect. Bad Wi-Fi connectivity over here. So my name is Husin Chandra, Senior Director, Chief Architect at JC. It's a great privilege to be invited to this panelists for obvious reasons, of course. And the reason why is because I spearheaded and embarked on the cloud migration journey for JCPenney back in 2016. And of course, partnering with Grid Dynamics. That's the first time I met Max. And we basically migrated the e-commerce platform from on-prem monolithic platform to cloud native and microservices platform, right? And we also established the cloud native data lake as well in the cloud. And during that journey, I was responsible for establishing the cloud engineering and operations team, which includes DevOps, site reliability engineering, performance engineering as well, and the advanced analytics team. And looking forward to basically share my experience with all of you guys and lessons learned. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Husin. That's fantastic. So we've got a great panel. Just a little intro on myself. I come from primarily the technology marketing world, having started at Apple in the early 80s, before the Macintosh was even developed, and ultimately becoming the consumer marketing manager for the Macintosh. And I've gone on to be a CMO of many companies in the Silicon Valley and vice president, head of brand at Adobe, ran Cisco's messaging and worldwide PR, was the CMO and head of the WebEx online business and many other things. Today I work as a consultant, and I absolutely love the opportunity to get to work with companies like Grid Dynamics. And with panels like this, it's very exciting and very fun to work with amazing professionals who teach me something every day. So that's our panel. We are very appreciative to you, our audience, for joining us today. And I thought that a nice way to get started, instead of just turning right to our panel, might be to turn to our audience and ask you a question. So I've got a little poll for you all to participate in. So get ready, because I've got a few more. So we really want your thoughts. So Anna, if you can put up the first poll for us. And if you haven't used a poll before, you go down to, there's a polling button that you'll see at the bottom of the screen when the poll comes up that you can click on to be able to answer the poll. So just answer number one, please. You don't need to answer number two. But number one is, where are you in your cloud migration process? So just choose one of these, which is, are you still on-prem? Do you have some cloud, but still mostly on-prem? And are you moving mostly to the cloud, but with a little left on-prem, or are you all cloud, right? So take a minute, choose the one that best applies to you. And then we should be able to see the results. Anna or Alex, one of you, if you can show us those, that would be great. And we've got some numbers up. Okay. Well, it looks like the majority of you who have joined today are in the earlier part of the process. 66% are in the earlier part of the process of moving onto the cloud. So I think this should be I think you joined the right webinar. I think this should be great. And I also think those of you who are in a little bit of the later stages may have some different challenges. We'll cover some of those as well. And it sounds like no one's made it all the way up to heaven yet, which is all cloud. I'm not sure any company has, to be honest with you, but I'm glad to see that you're all on the journey. So that's fantastic. Well, before I let you all do something else on this call, because I want you to stay engaged and excited, let's go to one more poll. So let's do poll number 2. So one more poll for you all, and then we'll start doing some of the heavy lifting here. So this is poll number, well, it says 1, but it's poll number 2. So what best describes your company's migration to the cloud? So choose again one of these that best describes where you're at. It's going really well. We're on time, on budget, and it's working better than before. It's going pretty well, but we have a few unexpected problems. It's been tougher than we thought, and we haven't started or in the very early stages, right? Just tell us how tough it's been for you, what the experience has been like. And then Anna, when you see most people have responded, if you can bring up the results, that would be great. I'm hoping most of you are going to say it's going really well, but I have this sneaking suspicion that, it might not quite be there. Okay. Well, oh gosh, no one says it's going really well. All right. Well, my suspicion was right. It's going okay for some, but it's been tougher than we thought, and we haven't started early stages is about 80%. Okay. Well, guess what? You're not alone. That's the good news. It is pretty tough. It's a huge transition. So hopefully today you'll come away with some really good thoughts and ideas around not only what you can do to make that transition easier and better for you, but also, just some specific ideas from what other companies have done. So I want to show you now, let's just go to the next slide, because we talked about where you all are at in your transitions. And if you look at the slide this is an IDG, so it's pretty recently 2020 slide. They interviewed many companies, and what they saw was that in the transition, most companies are where you guys said you're at, which is the majority are still on-prem. Most is on-prem, but moving to the cloud, right? So we've got about 28% that's on the journey of mostly cloud or all cloud. But look at the numbers for in 18 months. You're going to start to see some really significant changes as many more people from that move from that kind of pinkish red category and then the dark blue into most of their network being in the cloud. So it's pretty clear that a lot of companies are putting a lot of investment and a lot of time and a lot of effort into making that transition and making that transition now. And first, I really want to applaud you all for taking that step and trying to make that happen, because it is a big project to undertake, but it's one that everyone's doing. And if you aren't there in 18 months into that kind of grayish area, you're probably lagging behind some of your big competitors. So I think it's really important to push to get that transition to happen now. So let's get into the meat of our presentation, because now we want to hear about, okay, how do we get to that gray and light blue area? So I'm going to turn to our panel. So can we go to the next slide? And I've got some questions for them. I think they're questions that represent what you all in the audience might be thinking about. And Anna, if you want to stop sharing so we can just see people's videos, that would be really helpful. And I'm going to kick off the first question, which is about migrating to the cloud. And Husin, this question, I'm going to start with you. Migrating to the cloud it's a huge project. I mean, this is many years it's going to take to get there. But, you know, the question is, being that it's so big, it's so time consuming, it's budget consuming, it's soul consuming, do the benefits outweigh the work that's involved? And you've been through it, so I think you're going to speak with some real experience here.
Yes, thank you, June. Yes, great question. And the answer is, of course, from me is absolutely yes, right? The benefit definitely much larger than you think. I remember when I first trying to present and sell this back in 2016, socialized this cloud migration strategy. I asked our CEO back then, Marvin Ellison, who came from Home Depot, right, to JC Penney. And I asked him the question, when you build a house, what is the most important thing when you build a house? And of course, his answer is a strong foundation is the most important thing. So that's basically the analogy that I always use. You need to have a very strong foundation, right, to build your digital capabilities on top of it. And think about the cloud native, some best architecture best practices such as microservices, APIs and stuff. Think about those as your foundation for your digital capabilities, right? Your online capabilities, regardless of which industry you're in. And what the benefits that I see with the cloud foundation is, number one, I think, is speed to market, which is a very huge benefit, which I think is very much undervalued. And also it's very difficult to quantify in terms of benefits, right? But my personal opinion is that the opportunity cost alone, from delaying or not enabling new business capabilities, right, to potentially grow your business, that alone outweighs all the cloud migration work, in my opinion, right? And the speed to market is enabled by you're able to basically spin up your compute or your environment, like the infrastructure as a service, or even platform as a service, such as the messaging broker and persistent databases, right? And even if you want to enable like AI ML right now, a lot of AI ML capabilities are provided by many of the cloud providers, right? They have been democratized and to a certain extent commoditized as well. So with that, those services, you can build a lot of business capabilities in a faster manner. So the speed to market is number one. The second one, I think it relates more to retail, is the ability to leverage the elastic cloud compute to basically reduce your operational and capital expenditure, right? And in the past, when you're on-prem, especially for retail, you have to basically procure and provision the burst traffic capacity, right? Even though the burst traffic capacity is only needed for the peak holiday seasons, where you have 5 to 10 times of traffic coming in during those times, right? Or even sometimes with brand launches or product launches, you see the spike in traffic as well. So the elastic compute, the ability to basically expand, burst that capacity, infrastructure capacity, and shrink is a huge value, right? You don't have to basically procure and provision those hardware in your data center, and you can just basically scale it up in the cloud. And once the high season or high traffic volume is over, you can always shrink it back. So those two are the main benefits that I see.
Those two are great benefits. And I love the idea of the elasticity of the cloud. And especially if you're in a business like retail that is going to be very seasonal. So great,
Exactly.
great feedback. And Ravi, do you want to add anything to that? What have you seen from your perspective?
Yeah, like there's kind of might combine a little bit of some of the other questions, but it's always beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? So it is a large undertaking. I'm sure Husin can chat about when you're doing a cloud migration, you're unpacking years of work that you probably haven't ever seen, right? Like a lot of times work is project based. And so if you're kind of in charge of unpacking decisions that happened several years ago, it could seem very daunting. But absolutely, like the benefit, like in my mind too, like it diagnosed the patient. Certain industries are more elusive to it, but the quintessential answer. It's great that Husin works for JCPenney because like you're a quintessential use case for the cloud elastic compute. But anybody can be subject to that. You don't have to be particularly in retail at any given time. Who knows when you're going to have a runaway success or a system problem like a thundering herd type of problem. And so by using elastic resources, the cloud, it's easier. Kind of like 2 quick points. Also, it helps you focus on your core of your business. So I'm just going to pretend like talking from Harness perspective, like we're able to deliver functionality for our clients that makes sense as core to our business instead of worrying about, do we have sufficient compute capacity in a particular cloud? Or going back to that democratization of different technologies. A lot of times with cloud infrastructure, there's more to it than just the compute, the storage, the networking, like those 3 core foundations. And there's a lot of high margin services too. So for example, let's say I want to use Kubernetes for the first time. I might not be an expert in Kubernetes, but I can go spin up, GKE, AKS, EKS fairly quickly and have a semi to almost operational piece of infrastructure ready to consume. Let's say if I have to platform engineer for my end client. So again, it helps agility. It helps you focus on the core of your business, and success is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, great points. And I love the idea of agility with the cloud. I think it fundamentally gets you out of the hardware business and into the agile world of software. So I think absolutely wonderful. So Max, I want to turn to you now and ask you a question, which is, we have so many people on this call who are in the early stages of this cloud adventure. So from your experience, and I know you've worked with many companies to help them get from a full on-prem into the cloud, what do you see as the key steps that a company needs to take to prepare for this vast project, or even once they've started it, to continue to be ready to move to the next stage?
Thank you, John. I think the most important step that any company needs to make in order to start this transition to the cloud is to understand, take a look at all the applications and the systems that the company has, and understand which ones it makes sense to move to the cloud in the first place. Because when you look at the entire application portfolio or the data platforms and everything else, the company might notice that there are some applications which are in active development, and hence they would benefit from this increased agility and speed to market that the cloud brings. There are some applications which can benefit from scalability and auto scaling because they, for example, are customer experience applications, and the customer experience and customer traffic fluctuates over time instead of back office applications. And select those applications and select those use cases and start with them, and start small and prove the business value as you go. Because if you choose the wrong application and move to the cloud with the wrong one, you will not see any cost benefits, and you will not see any benefits from agility and speed to market. So taking a look to summarize, understanding what applications and systems you want to move to the cloud and what new use cases you want to enable there, and essentially separating them into separate buckets of what applications you want to move, and for example, they don't require a lot of modernization, maybe just a little bit of adjustments of changing databases and so on and so forth. Maybe some applications are already cloud native and are using cloud native stack, and would be great benefits to move to the cloud quickly. But some applications, it might just make sense to leave in the data center for now.
Yeah, that is such wise advice, because, you know, we think about, as technology people, we think, okay, how do we make this all happen? But then there's the people side of this as well, which is it's such a huge and long-term project that if you don't choose the right things and you can't succeed, the rest of the company may thwart you from being able to continue to get the budget and the resources to continue this transition. So I think what you're saying is choosing the right pieces to begin with. It's almost like a chess game. You want to choose the right pieces to set the strategy up correctly so that you can continue to build on that in the future. I love that.
And it's much easier to basically continue if you experience success in the early stages of the game than if you get disappointed by doing something and it's not bringing you benefits.
Exactly. So, I mean, we all want to have success early on. So I think it just speaks to being, I think your 2 points that let's make sure we know what we want to move, because there's things you're not going to want to move, and you can't simply just pick it up and move it in most cases. So you have to think, what is that transition? But secondly, moving the right things in the right order so that you do get early success is critical. So love that. Okay, thank you, Max, for that. And now let's move to another question that I know is probably on a lot of people's minds, and that is, you know, and I especially think, Husin, for you, what are typically the most challenging tasks, or maybe the gotchas in a cloud transition? And I'd love to hear from you, what are some specific examples of some obstacles that you faced and that you had to overcome as you embarked and rolled out on this project?
Yes, there is definitely a lot of challenges that we face, and I'm just going to pick a couple, which I think is very, very important, because I feel that many of the engineering team, you know, focuses a lot on the build phase, right? But they neglect a lot on the run phase, which is the operation. So achieving operational excellence, right, to me is a very, very tough challenge during the migration and even after the migration, right? So we talk about speed to market, and how do you basically achieve speed and agility without sacrificing quality and stability? So that's a very, very challenging task, right? So what we did was, at the very beginning, I think we every time we release something, so we basically try to release every 2 weeks, right? So from having 6 releases a year, we try to release up to 20 releases a year. And when we try to achieve that type of speed and agility, a lot of times we see stability issue every time after we release a new feature to production, right, or capabilities. So we have to enhance and strengthen the test automation. So we have a release automation team, right, that basically just work closely with each of the um, functional capability team that is migrating to basically automate a lot of the testing. So we try to follow the test-driven development, try to make sure that we do a shift left mindset, right? Try to ensure enough test coverages is there so that we can ensure every single release we don't see a lot of stability issue or quality issue when we launch the release. So the other thing that we also do, I think, is basically we kind of like look at a lot of the KPIs. Like we have a site reliability engineering team that monitor like all the production every release, and we use that as a KPI and a metric to basically measure the success of our quality, right? It's not just moving fast. You have to move fast without sacrificing quality and stability. So that's one daunting task in my opinion. The other one is cloud economics and financials. I think that is a very important one as well, because it's very different from managing your financials on-prem, right? It's so dynamic. It can get out of control very easily. So you need to have a very strong guardrails just to basically optimize the costs and make sure that you have monitoring alerts for all the different consumption threshold, right? Have the tool to help you predict and do an accurate forecast. And there are tools out there like Cloud Health, even the cloud providers, a lot of them have their own tool to help you manage the cloud financials and economics. So those two are very challenging tasks, and we're still doing it right now. We're still trying to improve those areas.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I think your point about being able to manage what now becomes what was equipment to a service is really challenging, because it's not like the service is going to stay static. It's going to keep changing, and people are going to keep adding to it. And all of a sudden, one group's going to be using a huge amount of resources, and then that's going to change. So what you have to do is keep your eye on the ball so that you can stay within your budget, or at least ask for more budget if you need it. But it is a whole new world when you move to the cloud. So
exactly, yeah,
totally challenging. So thanks for sharing that. Max, you've worked with a lot of companies. I mean, have there been things that companies have learned, or that you've learned, that were kind of surprises that came up, or obstacles that came up during the course of the transition?
I actually want to talk about a trend that I'm noticing over the past, I would say, 5 years. When initially we were speaking with companies about moving to the cloud, many companies would consider moving to the cloud as what is currently known as lift and shift. When people would just take their VMs and applications and try to deploy them to the cloud and do the kind of binary transition or do something like that. But lately, more and more companies I'm speaking with want to move to the cloud and actually change how they deploy their applications, how they provision infrastructure for them, and then how they establish these continuous delivery processes. Because I guess this change in the mood, I would say, is coming from the fact that when you move these VMs to the cloud, you might just not recognize a lot of value, and now companies actually are looking at how they modernize their applications, technology stack, and change their culture of how they're working with cloud. So for someone new who is considering migration to the cloud, I would say, again, take a look at the migration together with application modernization, so that you can change this culture, change your technologies, and change a lot of things, essentially how you are delivering software.
Yeah, that's great advice, and very concrete advice as well. So audience, I want to take a minute and ask you another question related to the discussion we've been having. So Anna, if you can bring up the next poll, I'd love you all to chime in with your thoughts. on this one. So really, based on what we just talked about, where did you have, or where do you expect to have the biggest challenges in migrating to the cloud? And you can choose any that apply here. Don't just go down and check them all, but I mean, what are the top ones that you think in your company are going to be your biggest challenges or have been your biggest challenges? Go ahead and click on the ones that you think apply to you and your company. And then we'll take a look in a minute. And if there's one or some that you don't see on this list, if you want to add it into the Q&A, we can discuss that. Okay, Anna, you want to bring up the results? All right, wow, well, we've got coverage across the board. It looks like budget is probably the one that people are least worried about, which I'm happy to see. I'm a little surprised because I think it can be fairly challenging. But it looks like our big winner is privacy and security. And then finding the right people is also a real challenge, which is pretty understandable considering the tasks that you're going to be doing, not only to get there, to migrate, but I think as Husin was saying, to actually operationalize this new world are going to be very different from the skills that people have had in the past. And staying on schedule, another big one. But yeah, you guys, you've got the challenges across the board. So I think we're talking about the right topic. So thanks everybody for taking a minute to fill that one in. I'm going to go to my next question. And Ravi, let me ask you this one. So one area that can be really concerning for companies is performance. And I think Husin already touched on this. Companies have spent years optimizing for performance, and then they're moving to the cloud, which means that, you know, you're going to need to rethink how you optimize. And as Husin said, also how you optimize for staying within budget as well as for performance. But how do you ensure that an experience is as good, if not better, once a company has moved to the cloud? So how do you ensure that that user experience is a really good one in the cloud, as good as, if not better than it had been when it was on-prem?
Yeah. So I think it's really key to like measure things. So user experience can be very subjective at times, right? Or the quintessential, the website slow. What's slow for me might be fast for Max, right? Or vice versa. And so having good baseline data, what it was something was before versus what something going to be after, is important. Also, it's usually not one big bang, right? You're moving piece by piece by piece by piece. And so it even gets to be more challenging because certain services or certain parts of the application might move before other parts of the application. And so it's just staying on the rigor of it, right? Just keeping track of what's going on, monitoring it. If you have to revert anything, go ahead and revert back. Because again, with the cloud, there's just this concept called the fallacies of distributed computing. Like, that latency is a thing, right? If you're going from, well, I'm going to pretend, the DC area, like I have one on-prem data center here in Bethesda, Maryland, and then now we're going to US East and US West on Amazon. Like, who knows where those data centers? Well, Amazon knows, but right, like their latency could come into play. Other things that you haven't thought of before will come into play. Bandwidth is not infinite, right? So if you're used to connecting over a fiber channel in your data center, now you're connecting over some sort of shared infrastructure in a public cloud vendor. And so just keeping track of that, right? But just making sure you're having a consistent user experience. It is a challenge, right? Like having proper monitoring tools and user experience tracking tools is crucial for that.
And you were the one who said, I think earlier, about beauty being in the eye of the beholder. So from the end user's point of view, are there any thoughts around how you get feedback there? Because while you might be monitoring everything and seeing good numbers, perhaps their experience, because for example, what Max said is, you can't just whole stock move your apps over usually. So if the apps change and the user experience changes, how do you make sure that your end users are still happy and satisfied?
Well, you don't want to see it on Twitter, right? Like, at JCPenney was my order going through. That's like the last place you want to see it, right? Like, oh boy, we have a problem. But might really get to my compatriots here. But yeah, there's lots of ways to like do end user testing, like real user testing, end user testing, synthetic testing. Like, there's a plethora of ways. But also making sure you get that right. Like, we can be inundated with monitoring data. We get it from logs? Do we get it from the end user device? Where do we get it from? And also, is it an internal customer or external customer, right? Our internal teams might complain differently than our external customers. And so how do you go about managing that? There's just a lot of like, how do you wade through the noise? Are you monitoring for infrastructure? Are you monitoring for app performance? Are you monitoring for one of the core pillars like compute or networking saturation? There's lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff there. And so kicking it back to like Husin's point, like their organization has a reliability engineering team, right? So like it takes close coordination with, several teams monitoring reliability engineering, cloud infrastructure, to make sure things are going right. So it's not one person or one tool, it's an army of or a tribe of people to make that happen.
Yeah, so that really suggests that part of the your success is going to be based on how well you build a cross-functional team and get groups to work together to ensure that ultimately the experience is a good one. So I love that. I think that's really wise advice. Husin, like now you've been going through this, and I'm wondering how your end users are reacting to this and how your performance has been. And I know you've been really trying to, create a great operational team and great operational results, but how has it been working for the people who are on the receiving end of the services you're providing?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, we have a dedicated performance engineering team, right? Which for every single releases, we actually do a performance and load test on the backend side at the API level, right? On the API and services level, and even on the front end, we also uses tools like web page tests and Lighthouse and all those things to basically understand even the page download time from a front end perspective. So we have front end, back end, and site wide load tests. Every single releases we do that. So we have a shift left mindset. We do performance tests for every single release, right? We involve the performance engineers in many of the feature requirements and scoping sessions, so that they understand like what are some of the features that may impact the performance of the site, or certain capability or services. So that's basically how we handle it, and it is very important because it's not just about availability. When you run an e-commerce site, it's 24/7, right? Your site has to be highly available, has to be highly scalable, and the performance has to be very, very fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Really, really helpful to illuminate it, because a lot of times we just kind of gloss over. It's like performance, but then there's so many pieces to it. It's so important to look at all of those if you really want to have great performance. So I think that, as I'm listening to you all talking, I'm realizing there's so many aspects to moving to the cloud, and you're going to have to get tools. You're going to have to get a team that knows how to do this, or expertise into your organization to help you do it. You're going to need to have a cloud vendor. You're going to need to be able to manage the utility of the cloud that you're using on a regular basis, that you may not have insight into who's using it and how they're using it all the time. So Max, from your point of view, as companies are moving to the cloud, there are going to be a lot of expenses. And, in the old days of on-prem, it was essentially the equipment and the software, right? But now we've got all these different expenses. I mean, just listening to Husin talk, it's like so many tools he's naming off. So you're going to have to get new tools, right? You're going to have to get new training for your team. You're going to have to probably get new people. You may need new vendors. You're definitely going to need your cloud services and the utilities that go along with that. So how do you, Max, approach with your clients keeping cost from being a barrier to getting the project done? And I'd love to get your thinking on it and your wisdom.
The interesting thing with the cloud is actually like if you're migrating to a data center, the upfront cost might be extremely high, but then your kind of run rate is relatively predictable. With the cloud, the upfront cost of the cloud itself is usually very low, and it's relatively easy to start using the cloud. The problem, the companies typically start seeing problem after several months or years working with the cloud, when they start seeing that this cost actually keep going higher and higher and higher, and you actually need to keep them in check. And there is a number of ways to control that and to manage your cost. I want to probably pick 4 of them. One is, again, when you migrate the applications and modernize them in the process, then if you use containers instead of deploying these applications on VMs, then you can save easily like 30% of your infrastructure cost just by reducing the overhead on the VMs, or maybe even more, depending on how efficiently you use them. Second is definitely using auto-scaling and predictive scaling to the right extent. Because if you don't use that flexibility and that agility that the cloud gives you, then obviously you're just paying more. And especially like Husin said, for the applications which are customer oriented, there are huge fluctuations of traffic during the day, during the week, and during the year. For a retail, it might be, I don't know, like 2 orders of magnitude between a night somewhere on Wednesday on a regular day and the peak on the holiday season in the middle of the Black Friday. It's important to notice here that there are some applications, if you design them right, you can actually auto scale them pretty efficiently with the cloud features that the cloud gives you. For some applications which are not stateless and are just more complicated, you might think about something like predictive scaling when you figure out the load on these applications, historical load, and then using this historical load, you project what would be your utilization going forward, and then you pre-scale them and essentially make sure that you can meet those new traffic requirements that are coming. The third thing is that majority of the companies might miss is the lightweight continuous delivery process. Because companies might spend twice as much on dev test environments than on production environments. And these costs are often overlooked. And these costs are usually spiking when a company first migrates to the cloud, because there is a lot of freedom. Now you can provision environments all the way you want. And developers are typically asking for a lot of them, QAs are asking for a lot of them, and often they just forget to delete them when they're done. So, of course, you need to monitor that and just kind of remove those environments, but also rethink how you release your software. Because you can achieve way lesser cost on the dev test environments if you design your CI/CD process in the right way, and if it's a more lightweight continuous delivery process. And the final one, of course, you need monitoring. You need to understand how much you are paying, and you need a breakdown by project, by department, by application, by the type of environment, so that you can actually figure out where you're overspending and reduce the costs there.
Yeah, that's such wise advice. And I'm definitely learning from you. And I know I've heard some of these things from customers before, but others are new to me. And I think things that we should all be thinking about as we're going forward on this. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's very pragmatic. Ravi, would you like to add anything around costs? Are there any tips that you have for companies on how to manage or prepare for the cost of this transition?
Yeah, like Max had a lot of very salient points, right? Like the upfront costs are not a lot, but the gotchas usually come months down the line. And then also you made a lot of investment in staff, and like there's a lot of overhead that you have to budget for, right? Like retraining people, retooling the platforms. Like there's a lot of sunk costs going into it, but the initial, when you get that bill from the cloud provider is usually pretty small. I would say like democratize that information pretty quickly. To be frank, like when I had workloads running in a data center, I actually had no idea how much it cost. Like I didn't know what the internal calculations were for like our system engineering team to get charged back to my department. Like it was a question mark. I do know how much Amazon charges me per month because it goes to my credit card, right? So like I know exactly how much it costs. But getting that information out to different teams can be like a really challenge. I think Husin hit the nail on the head that it might be tied up with the finance department, right? So if does your engineering teams know this democratization of cloud costs, just disseminating that information to what makes sense to the engineering teams, like how much does an application cost? How much does this particular resource cost? I would say a lot of this thing called FinOps, this type of concept. I would say organizations should march towards that because it enables efficiencies to be made that if you need to adjust, good FinOps practices will say, hey, adjust for cost optimization. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you for the additional thoughts. I think that's very helpful. So, Husin, I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask you a question that I actually haven't asked you before, but I'm actually really curious after we've been through this conversation, which it's been on my mind since we've been talking, which is how did you manage people in making this transition? Because I know you mentioned earlier that you you worked with Max and the grid team on it, but I'm wondering, like, did you have special training for your team? Did you need to hire new people? You obviously hired Grid to help you, but I'd love to just hear your thoughts on the people side of making that transition.
Yeah. I think this is a great question, right? So people, process, tools, and tools is the easiest one to migrate, right? People and process and having that agility and flexible culture is not easy. And just let me tell you how I first started it. I mean, I first told my boss that I can't use probably the same system integrator that we have been using in the past, right? I need a consultant company that is strong in terms of cloud computing, number one. Number two, and strong in automation as well, like continuous integration and continuous delivery. So I had previous experience relationship with Grid Dynamics where we try to automate our software delivery process with CI/CD, and that's where I started engaging Grid Dynamics and Victoria, Max. They were here at the very beginning, and that's how we get started. I mean, we start small. We think big, but we start small. We get a few what do you call that? A few use cases, which we think is very easy for us to implement and try it out, right? And whatever POC, proof of concept or proof of technology that we have, we actually use that as a reference implementation, right? And we went to production with that, right? And of course, I have to cherry pick a few strong engineers that have the growth mindset that is willing to learn new things and not afraid of doing that, right? And you got to switch your core of like your system administration team to more like a system engineering team, right? So the administration mindset has to go away. The engineering mindset, the automation has to come in, and that's very important. And it's not easy. And then even automating tests, the releases and the tests. Not every single engineering team is doing well or follow that, right? Some team has a higher test coverage, some team doesn't. So definitely like influencing and changing the culture is a much daunting task compared to just migrating your, the tool or your application to the cloud.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And did your budget for people go up, down, or stay about the same?
The people wise, I think it will probably go up. The reason why is because talent acquisition was a big challenge. That was like 5-6 years ago. Not many people, and even if they're doing around the same time, right? Late 2015, early 2016, and trying to find the right talent was very, very difficult. And definitely there's a lot of even some talents that we hire, they probably don't have the cloud computing experience, but we just train them. As long as they have that strong engineering mindset and willing to learn, I think that's what we seek in terms of um, great talents within our team, right? And especially that core foundational team is very important to find the right people there, right? It's always seek for quantity versus, quality versus quantity, right?
Mhm.
So it's not, you don't need to hire an army of people. What you need to hire is a few really good engineers to basically help build that foundation and start
Okay.
up the whole migration process. Yep.
That's great. That's really, really helpful advice. And it's good just to have people's expectations get set around that. And so Max, now you're coming at it from the other side, which is, you provide these services to many, big brands out there like JC Penney and many, many others. Do you have any tips for companies on the people side of this business and how you manage that and what they can expect there?
I would say that Husin just summarized it brilliantly, and I want to just say one thing that to basically reiterate and focus on one thing that Husin said. When starting this cloud transformation program, it's important to pick the right people within your own team, and then maybe bring some experts from the outside, but then put them together, and they will learn by doing this transformation together. And then you can disseminate that knowledge. You will have some seed of the culture within the company, and you will be able to do that. And this is what Forrester calls agile co-creation, agile co-innovation, like the new engagement of vendors with companies. And this is how we typically work. This is how we worked with JCPenney, with Husin. And this is how we worked with pretty much all of our clients. And I can say that this training, if done right, this training can be done relatively fast, because cloud, although it might be complex, it might be daunting task to begin with, but this long journey starts with a simple one short step. And then we work with the clients when the first engagement took us, let's say, several months to provision the first set of applications on the cloud and transform them, re-platform them, implement something new. But then the infrastructure team already knew how to set up the cloud. Security was already set up. All the accounts were there. All the best practices were there, and all the frameworks and all the and the core platform was there. So then, with that, we were able to scale to tens and hundreds of applications next year.
Okay, that's actually great advice and really very pragmatic and helpful, I think, for our audience. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. This time has flown by. For me, at least, it's been really great advice. I think really helpful. I do want to just take one audience question, because I know I have a few, but we're not going to have time for all of them. But Husin, I'm going to give it to you, because you've just been working on this, and I think you may have some good advice for us. But it was also something that came up in the poll, and it is around security. So somebody wrote in and said, one of our challenges is how to best handle security once we have all our data in the cloud. Any thoughts on this? And I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to have to ask you to keep it to about a minute, because we're running out of time.
Yeah,
so
no,
if you can offer
no
in a minute on security would be great.
Yeah, security is going to be a long answer, but try to make it short. Basically, we collaborate very closely with our IT security team, right? To make sure that, like, all the PCI data, everything is encrypted. We created a DMZ with all the firewall intrusion protection or detection system, right? Everything within our VPC. So we have a DMZ just for the e-commerce platform, because you are exchanging data, there's data at rest, there's also data in transition, right? Which we need to protect. Like everything is SSL based. So security is very important, and I would recommend partner closely with the security team and help them understand there are a lot of services within your cloud provider that can actually enhance and make the security a lot more secure than hosting your applications on-prem, right? So that's something that I think is you need the cloud provider's help, and your security collaborates strongly with the IT security team to make sure that that understanding is there, right? Once you created that DMZ zone and all those things, I think everything is just like if there's a PII data that you want to encrypt, many cloud providers provide the encryption, and then the customer owns the encryption key, right? So even data at rest, you can encrypt the data if you want to. So in short, that's the answer on the security side.
No, that's a pretty good top line answer with some really pragmatic advice for people again. So I love those tips. And yeah, it's a much bigger topic, obviously, but at least I think you've pointed people in the right direction. So unfortunately, this time has flown by and we're going to have to wrap up right now. But I want to close by thanking our panelists. So Husin and Ravi, fantastic feedback. Loved your enthusiasm. Loved your very hardcore tips and things that people can actually think about and take back to work. Max, you as well, great feedback. And I do want to thank Grid Dynamics and Max for sponsoring this webinar. Really appreciate that. And most of all, I really want to thank our audience. Number one, for coming and taking the time to listen and also to participate with our polls. Really appreciate you sharing where you're at. And I would like to wish all of you the most success with your cloud transition and a really great rest of your day. So thank you so much. Please join us. We'll be offering another webinar very soon in the future. We'd love to have you be a part of that. Talk to you all later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.